This meeting is being recorded. We follow the NumFocus Code of Conduct. If anything happens, feel free to reach out to me, john@numfocus.org. And let's get underway. So we've got two talks, presentations, conversation starters today. I hope one is coming from Peculiar, and please correct my pronunciation as we get to you. And the other is going to be coming from Sam. Peculiar's with Chaos. She can do her own introduction, but Chaos does a lot of metrics analysis. So I know in Moss, we're getting to the point where we want to start considering thinking about considering integrating some sort of metrics into what we're building. I know with my work with the UC network right now, they're very interested in activity metrics, like what's an active project? What constitutes active? Is it a merge? Is it a comment on an issue? Is it a closed PR? Is it a release? That sort of thing. So the Chaos does a lot more metric analysis than just those simple things. And then Sam, also you'll be able to do your own introduction once we get to your section after the Chaos. But Sam and I met at US RSE. Sam has built Moss for the US National Labs. So he's going to share with us his experience doing that, mapping out their contributions to and use of open source. So if anyone feels inclined, we're not going to do introductions today. We got too many people. But if you want to introduce yourself, feel free to throw it in the chat. And there's also a shared notes docs. Let me get the link here. You can also add it to that. Although, to be honest, AI is so good these days. Like, we're just going to synthesize the recording into an AI note and post those. The recording will also be shared publicly and uploaded in the shared drive for everyone. If you do not have access to that shared drive, you have to join the Google group, which I'm getting a link to right now. There it is. You will be joining 148 members of this group. Gosh, this thing has grown. Yeah, so once you join that group, you should be given access to a shared drive for the Moss interest group. I'll also remind everyone, and we'll bring this up at the end as well, that we have a working session, just a co-working session every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, I think. We just get together for an hour and we all work on stuff related to Moss because we're all in the same call. All right, so that's all for logistics. Unless Alexi, Tim, missing anything?
I'm good.
All good. Awesome.
Beautiful. Then with that, I'll hand it over to Peculiar.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm going to pick my slide. Yeah. Okay. Just to be sure if you can see that. Can you all see my slide?
Yes, we can see it. Looks great.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me, and welcome to this talk at Chaos Metrics Insight. So, this is my name. My name is Umeh, and I'm a software developer, a project manager, and Scrum Master. I'm co-chair Chaos Project Management, Chaos Education Project Manager and Maintainer, and co-leading Chaos Metrics new template redesign. So that's just simple me. All right. So in this talk, we're going to be looking at, in the agenda, we're going to look at Chaos overview, and we look at Chaos metrics. I will dive deep to look at key metrics collected by Chaos, application of Chaos metrics, and we look at what I call 3 how, and then we look at what should you track. Then we conclude. Okay, let's start by looking at Here's overview. Now, HEALS is stands for Community Health Analytics for open source software. And we focus on defining metrics and developing software to help people improve the health and sustainability of their open source projects. Okay, so we are open source Linux Foundation project and globally distributed with over 2,000 members in Slack. So what we are not, earlier I said here's community health. So we are not focused on mental health, right? So just community health or open source project, that's what we focus on. And we're not for profit with any specific mandate at all. And also, we also not focus only on code contribution. We welcome different types of contribution, both non-code contribution and all. So that's chaos. Let's now look at chaos metrics. We start with key metrics collected by chaos. Okay, so chaos collects metrics about organization, about software, about platform, contribution, event, governance, leadership, project life cycle, contributors, then about community and about the ecosystem. We collect metrics for all these and more. So each of these has several metrics and metrics model supporting them, right? So HEALS has a startup project health metrics model that contains about 4 key metrics that are applied to most open source or most communities can see. And I'll look into this startup project health metrics. One is time to first response, which measures the speed of responding to an issue or a pull request. And then the next is release frequency, which tracks how often a software project is being released. And then the next, we look at contributor absent factor. Now, formerly, contributor absent factor, it was called box factor. But along the line, the name changed to contributor absent factor. That assesses the consistency of contributor activity in your project. And we also have, the last one is change request closure ratio, which evaluates the efficiency of handling change request. You see, so what happened here is that these metrics we're looking at today, together, these 4 metrics together, this group of 4 metrics provide people a way to start thinking about the open source community health of the project they're interested in. That's what it does. But however, where each of open source projects and the community have slight different maybe need or goal or so because they have slight different need or goal. So we have different other additional metrics that are particular for different projects, but it depends on what you are trying to achieve. Okay, so HEALS developed metrics and metrics model too. So people can use it to measure the community and the project health in a way that makes sense to them, right? We can't recommend for this community, this is the particular metrics to use, though, but we develop them and we make it available for everyone to use it the way in your own context. Okay, so generally we have these metrics into a few categories. We have it, the first category we're going to look at is the DEI metrics. DEI metrics focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in community and also in project. And then metrics that are under these are metrics like event metrics, governance, leadership, and a whole lot of them. And again, we have another category that is called the risk metrics. The risk metrics focus on issues such as code contribution, code quality, dependency risk, and assessment. You also see license compliance here and security of the open source software. Then the next one, there are so many other ones, but I just pick a few of them to mention. Then the next category is the value metrics. Now, value metrics focus on metrics that can be used to understand the value generated by community or the value generated by participating in an open source community. And metrics under here, you have what you want to call organizational influence, or I can mention project velocity and all. So we can see that these are the kind of metrics that CHAOSS collect. But now let's look at how do we use them, right? You see that CHAOSS metrics are used to as a measure, an indicator to help community or project to assess the activity, the inclusivity and the contributions, and also the overall well-being of the open source software or open source project health. Now, you use metrics to understand the open source project that you care about to avoid disruption along the line. Okay, so we'll go ahead, keep looking at the use and the application of CHAOSS metrics. Now, within CHAOSS projects, we tend to look at metrics as being used in two primary purposes. Now, the first primary purpose is called contribution metrics. CHAOSS focused on contribution metrics for a while now, and these contribution metrics, the metrics are designed to be used to better understand project that you are participating in. And most practitioners working within OSPO tend to think about these contribution metrics as outbound or upstream. And we have about just the startup project metrics hub that within that we refer as the contribution matrix. As you can see them on my slide. Then lately we at CHAOSS decided to start focusing on consumption metrics. Like the metrics, that's a secondary the second primary type we focus on. Now, these metrics are related and can be referred to as inbound or downstream consumption of open source software within your product. It might be service, infrastructure, or research group. So we also have a startup viability metrics model with collection of four viability metrics under this category. As you can see, that refers to, you see governance is there, and you see community, and you see compliance and security, and strategy. So those are viability metrics that are under this category. Now, for CHAOSS metrics, we use tools like Ogo and Glemola to implement these metrics through different approaches. And again, we also have practitioner guide for those that without data analytic background to help them develop insight, improving the health of their open source software. Okay, now I'm going to use a contributor's sustainability practitioner guide as an example here. You see, contributor sustainability guide is an important part of assessing whether an open source project or community has enough contributors for the project to be sustained for over a long term. Okay, so contributor sustainability has a large impact on overall project sustainability. Now, the reality is this: there are more open source projects than available contributors. So if there are not enough contributors to sustain a project, the users and other project depends on that particular software might be significantly be affected in the future. So now the next I'm going to look at the three how, as I call it. Now the three how, we're going to explore the type of metrics we contribute, we collect, and we've also seen how these metrics are being used. And then let's see how these metrics are being developed. Okay. Now, how are case metrics, how are they developed? Case metrics are developed collectively by the kiosk members during our metric development meeting. Okay. The decision, someone asks how do we make decision and know this is a particular metric we want to develop? Okay, the decision to develop a specific metric is influenced by so many factors, and we consider these factors before we look into that, to call that discussion or that matrix. Now, it can be a factor like community need, maybe questions or concern raised by individual, or a question asked by individual, or a project, or it can be from maybe organization concerning their community health. So this factor we can determine to develop a matrix to be able to answer that question or be able to solve that concern. Then another one is research insight. Sometimes findings from academic researchers or industry studies might be one of the factors. And another one might be a practical application, maybe a real world challenge faced by software developer or a community or based in a project, and maybe open source practitioners also. So these forms are that's the type of the metrics we develop and the decision we make before we can develop any of the metrics. So once a potential matrix is identified, okay, so what we do is this will be discussed in detail during our matrix development meeting. Now, the goal is to refine the matrix definition, establish a clear measurement criteria, and determine how it can be effectively implemented. And once the factors I mentioned earlier are not just limited, the only factors we look at, there are many more how these questions can come up, and before we can look at it, discuss on it, and then decide to develop a matrix and give it this particular name that suits the question we're trying to answer. Now, let's look at how you, as a community, can identify a need in your project or in your community, which will inform your decision on what to track or what kind of metrics you can implement or use to be able to achieve your goal, or a question coming from your community. So what should you track? That's the next thing we're going to look at. Okay, so now, all right. Oh yeah, thinking about metrics, that's the next thing. One of the biggest challenge projects I've seen have with metrics for open source projects, where all data is available to gather and analyze, is that it can be overwhelming, right? When you have a lot of data, you have some visualizations, you have a lot of them, it can be overwhelming. So the best place to start isn't just actually with with the metrics. That's not the best place to start. But by spending, you're going to do is to first spend some time understanding the overall goal of your project, or it might be the organizational goal, before you can now think of, okay, which metrics will help us answer this question or solve this problem so we can achieve the general goal of the organization or of the project. So for chaos, within chaos, we like to use goals, question, metric approach, you know, by focusing on the goal, we identify the key question that data can answer. That's why we focus on goal. Okay, we identify the key question data can answer. Then this strategic approach helps us to what we focus on what is most relevant metrics to track that goal or that question, and then also track progress towards achieving the project objective or towards achieving the company's goal. Okay, so we have now looked at what metrics Kiosk collects. We've seen we collect metrics about organization, about softwares, about platform, about contributors, which I use example about the contributor sustainability guide, and then metrics about ecosystem, about project life cycle. We have seen the type of metrics you collect and more. So, and then we have seen the application also. How do we apply them? I've talked about how we develop them, and we use it to measure, as a measure and indicators for organization or individual to be able to track the activity, the inclusivity, the contribution, and the overall well-being of a project or a community health. And we've also seen how decisions have been made. There are so many factors that affect the decision on what discussion and the decision on what metrics to develop. So we have seen all this. Now the next thing is, I hope this helps you start thinking about your own goal, maybe your organizational goal, or a project that you've been working on, the goal of that project. And once you have this question, that means you have a question that needs an answer. Then the next thing is to focus on a few metrics. We have a lot of them. We have over, even up to 90, but the ones I work on, there were about 86 of them, and there are more. So it will help you to focus on which of these metrics, four of these two, that will be able to answer your question, that will help you interpret how you can assess or evaluate or analyze or the kind of data you need to collect. And then once you're able to find out this, then you can build on it and then develop more on those metrics that you've already picked up. Okay, so, and that is this for your metrics and more. So thank you, everybody, and I'm open for questions.
Beautiful, thank you. If anyone has a question, raise your hand in the chat. We'll have a couple minutes here, but then we gotta get over to Sam as well. One thing I did put in the chat here are three, I don't know if they're actually metrics, but 3 goals that we have right now with Moss. So I've also translated these over the notes, and I'm thinking if anyone has any metrics or goals that they think we should start thinking about that metrics will help with, start building out that list in the shared notes, which I'll put in the chat again for everyone. And I've broken it into 3 categories: metrics for projects, metrics for people, and metrics for papers. If you don't have access to that doc, go ahead and request and I'll get it to you. Boris, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder whether you try to measure your metrics as a function of time and look at the trajectories of the project in the space of metrics and try to correlate this with the success of project and so on. So basically, did you try to look at the time evolution of your metrics?
Okay, if I get your question very well, you're asking about if you measure timing.
No, time evolution. Basically, you have a metric, you measure it today a year ago, 2 years ago for the same project, and you can see whether it changed and how this change correlate with the success of the project.
Yep. Yes, we have metrics that track, like the one I gave an example about time. Like this is how it works. I give you an example. One of the metrics we have is time to response. Time to first response. That tracks, measures the time it take, and maybe it means a contributor raise an issue, the time it takes the maintainer to attend to that issue, or a contributor send a PR. What time does it take between when the PR was sent and when the maintainer responds to that PR? We measure that. Okay, so
I
because
wonder-
why we measure this is because if I send a PR and it stays for a day, 2 or a week, and nothing happened, nobody said anything, I might get discouraged that this project or this community, the maintainer is not like active. Okay, so we measure time. For a project, we have different things we measure. We can measure the time for that response. We can measure the release frequency. We can measure the contributors' activity in that project. We can also, all this what we measure, you can also see them, visualize them when you use either Augur or Glemolab to get visualization, the analysis of everything we measure in your project. So what Augur and Glemolab does, we add it either to your community or to your project. And then you set a parameter of exact thing you need to see. Okay, the question you want to answer. So once this is being done, these softwares will help you be able to have all the data you need, you see it. So for each project, we have a whole lot of things, metrics. I can use for a project, I can use like 6 or 7 metrics combined together to be able to achieve my project goal or the project objective. I don't know if I'm able to answer your question direct or if I deviated.
Well, I think one of the things that we're gonna have to think about a lot as we build out Moss is that time element of we don't want just a snapshot of a project. We want to see how a project changes over the course of 10 years. Someone I did in New York City called it, I think, the Drupal effect or something, where everyone's using one project now and then in 5 years no one's using it. We want to track that and not have to like snapshot it every month or 3 months, which is a very interesting challenge.
Possible, 100% possible. You see all the analysis. Okay, because of the timing, so I didn't come with example or a demo for you to be able to see. You know, when I joined Kiosk, I didn't know how everything works. So along the line, I was getting familiar with Glemolab. So I asked a question, can I see my first communication in the Slack group? Everything was pulled up for me, and I was able to see everything. I was able to see the whole data, what happened and all that. Then in a project, I asked, okay, can I be able to see the contribution I made for so time before I left, and I'm a second contributor now? So I was able to see all that data, right? So even for, there's also metrics for second contributors and a whole lot. So the thing is that when I have time, we can now bring out these metrics and we're able to look at what you want to measure. And then there are particular metrics that treat all those direct. And then we will be able to like bring them out, arrange, these are the metrics we need. And then we'll look at the implementation of those metrics in the project. I will be able to make use of them. So what you're talking about, perfectly, we have a metric that will help you measure that. And also, and a guide that help you be able to measure that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have, because we do need to move on now to Sam's presentation, do you have resources to where we could go to explore I think you said 90 some odd metrics that Chaos deals with, so you start
Okay.
familiarizing us with that.
Oh, okay. That didn't pop up on my slide. I wonder why. Because I have. Oh yeah. Okay.
Ooh,
So
could you copy those into the chat for us?
okay. Sure. I'm
That
going
would be
to.
so helpful.
I'm going to. I'm going to stop sharing that, and then I pick the link one after the other and drop them to the chat.
Appreciate it. And any other questions for Peculiar, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we'll be sure she gets them if she doesn't see them directly. But thank you so much. That was a great introduction to chaos. And I think it's we're gonna have to come back to this when we start diving more into metrics. But this gives us a solid foundation that we can start having some conversations about what type of metrics we're gonna want to think about when we continue to get some of the pathways that we've started developed in Moss built out. So with that said, Sam, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And first, could I get a thumbs up if you can hear me all right?
Loud and
Wonderful.
clear.
It's great to be here. I have a slide deck that I'm gonna show, and I'm going to do something which I've appreciated sometimes with others. But I'm actually just gonna drop a link in the chat to my slide deck itself. So if you want to skip ahead some slides as I'm talking, feel free to do that. The second question I have is my screen sharing yet? I see the box around it, but I'm not sure it's.
It just says Sam Schwartz has started screen sharing, but it doesn't really show anything on your screen.
All right, this is a great moment for the Jeopardy theme song to come on. The do 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 do. You know what I'm talking about? Or are we sufficiently old enough to remember that?
Jeopardy is still on. Come on. What are you talking about? I think it's Ken Jennings now.
That's right. That's right. I shouldn't say that because I've never actually watched Jeopardy myself. I just, it's a thing. I think my screen is sharing now. Is that a true statement?
For me, it's the same. Is it for anyone? Is it working for anyone?
Should I stop sharing and
No. Oh, now it's
Oh.
shared.
great, wonderful.
It just that to know you were threatening to stop, and then it would start.
Great.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, wonderful. So who am I? So my name is Sam. I recently got my PhD from the University of Oregon, and I am a curiosity-driven explorer. And I want to pause here because something just froze on my screen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and my screen has now moved on from the title slide. Is that also true?
That is not true.
That is not true. Oh my goodness. I don't know why Zoom is being me today. This is awfully embarrassing.
If you'd like, I can try and screen share, and you can just next slide me.
That would be great.
Let me get set up. And I do see a lot of people on the slides already, so they can follow along as well. All right. So we are on slide 2. I think everyone should be able to see my slides. Can you see it, Sam?
I can't see or hear anything now. Okay, now I can see you. Okay, great, wonderful. Let's do the full screen. I'm a big believer in not walls of text, but I have a lot of fly-ins. So great. Who am I? I'm Sam. Next, curiosity to explore next. And this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to map this world of research software engineering repositories. And that's useful so we can do a couple of things like the empirical analysis, how many projects need sustainability support, and I go and look over that that beautiful XKCD graphic that we've at least I've seen a number of times. I'm really interested in that tiny project that's being maintained by someone in Nebraska. Security vulnerabilities. And the reason why I started on this in the first place was because I was interested in learning, can we get training data for machine learning tools to, help developers of these projects? And it turns out, I thought that was going to be a really easy thing to do. We'll just find some projects, get some data, and off we go. And lo and behold, 2 years later, I'm still stuck on that first part. But also, just like we were saying, we need to establish a baseline so that we can track things over time. And so what I'm trying to do is map the broad contours. I'm not particularly interested in any individual project in any individual tree. And I am sorry for misleading you. This is not going to be the national lab. This is going to be about research universities, because this is work I recently published that works a lot with very similar methodology. Okay, so I've got my citation there. Let's move on to the next slide. And so there are a couple of research questions. I'm interested in finding all of them, all research projects somehow related to a U.S. research university. That was my goal. Which ones are RSE projects? And then of those RSE projects and research question, 3 and 4, things like how popular are they and do they have community? And so if we shuffle through, 2 times more, one more time, Jonathan, one more time, we've got 15 minutes here. So I am really going to only focus on those first 2. But yes, what are the software projects, with some nexus there, right? So moving on, I want to tell you about how I actually went about doing that. But first, I want to scope this. We mean R1 universities under the Carnegie system. We used IPEDS. If you haven't heard of IPEDS, it's a government survey that all universities are required to report to the federal government, in somewhere in the provost's office or some administrator who has to do this every year. We also wanted to limit our exploration to GitHub because GitHub. All right. And so we had a couple of approaches. How do we actually do this? And the first thing that we did is we scraped the university's website. So we got a list of, all, 170 something, 47, and we deployed it. And we were looking for links to GitHub repositories. And here's what our results were. We found that not all universities let you do web scraping, but a good chunk of them did. And so, we got some 45 million, just under 45 million, different web pages, and, that many per site. And we found from this scraping exercise, just about 10,000 different GitHub repositories where someone went through the trouble of posting on an official .edu address somewhere a link to GitHub, and that's how many there were. So another approach that we took, I think next slide if it's, yeah, GitHub, searching for keywords. So we, I went to GitHub and I searched, what is the name of the university? In my case, University of Oregon, the name or aliases, variations on the domain names. And we analyzed the first 1,000 or so that came up from each keyword. And the results that we found were, just under 20,000 repositories found through these keyword searches, which is great. Until you started actually looking at some of this data where we now had, this big warning or a problem. And so what is this? Moss, we have a problem. And that is, this is part two, right? Basically did the same set of experiments, but with all the national laboratories. I went and scraped their websites, I looked for keywords on GitHub, that sort of thing. With the national laboratories, just about every single GitHub repository that I found, I could make an argument of various degrees, but I could make an argument that it was a research software oriented project. This was not true. I could not, with a straight face say for so many of these projects, these are kind of your traditional research software engineering projects. They had homework projects, student video games, hackathon, on and on and on. Business application. Did you know that the University of Arizona, hosts the Arizona tourism? Like, I don't know. There was just all sorts of weird stuff because universities do a lot. And so the reason why I wanted to give you this presentation as opposed to my national lab presentation is because of how do we determine at scale whether a GitHub repository is an RSE repository or not? Because I was not going to settle down and click through 20,000 repositories to figure out whether in my personal opinion they were RSE or not. And so, uh, next slide, please. I did great. So the question then is, which ones are RSE projects? So we have this set, we've got to filter, which ones are actually, science related in some way, shape, or form. And so, the solution that I came up with was to use a large language model. And so when I was doing this a year or so ago, we said, consider this definition. And this is a big wall of text. I don't expect you to read it all, but this is the official, it's the definition of what a research software engineer is on the RSE website. And so I said, okay, this is a semi-formal definition. And so consider this definition, and we inserted the definition of RSE, and then we said consider the following information about this GitHub repository, and we inserted the repository's title, the description, and if it had a README, and copied and pasted that in. And then we said, given the above definition of a RSE project or RSE, and here's all this information about a GitHub, is this a repository, RSE or not? Give your answer, yes or no, right? And so we tried to validate that. We had two sets of data. We had our scrape set, which we found by scraping university websites. We had our search set, which is where we went and we searched for keywords related to each university. And we selected, this number. This is a number n for which gives you a confidence interval of plus minus 5% on a 95% confidence interval. And so we chose that number. And so for just under 400 repositories, I went through and manually categorized each one as RSE or non-RSE. And we found that from the scrape set, 60% were RSE. If someone went and actually went through the trouble putting a link on an official university webpage somewhere, it was more likely than not to be an RSE. But if it was just uploaded to GitHub and then there was a keyword about a university somewhere, that was significantly less likely. We ran these through ChatGPT and Grade, and here's where some of the results. And the big picture here, if you click next, is that our results were it was better than random chance, but it was not spectacularly amazing. ChatGPT did not always match what I said, and I declared myself the ground truth expert. But what we did say is, this is good enough to continue. And we also did some looking to see, is this in line with related work? And so someone else did something very similar. Instead of asking whether repositories were RSE, however, they were asking, is there something fishy about these repositories? Is there something malignant? Another study was more about just really niche medical questionnaires of finding, given this definition of a medical condition and given this symptom set that a patient is reporting of these kind of really weird, obscure diseases, is that true or not? And both of these studies uh, found that somewhere in the 80% range of agreement was found. So we said good enough to continue results. Not that we had any choice because I was still not going to manually label every one of these 20,000. So we said good enough to again get the broad contours of what we're looking at. So we ran it through, and here's what we found. We ran all 20,000 through, and next slide, or bullet. And we found that about 18% were RSE repositories, which when you combine the scrape set versus the search set, and that was right on par. We found that basically a median or mean university has some 300 RSE projects associated with it. But one of the things that I found that was surprising is that it was very rare that a RSE project was listed or affiliated with two different universities. It was usually only found by a link with one or the other. We also know that, we didn't scrape all universities, but if we were to linearly project, what we were able to scrape, this suggests to me anyway that there's 45,000 university affiliated RSE repositories in the world today in some way, shape, or form. So let's go next. I want to skip over. I want to actually just pause here. We have questions about which repositories have community. Sorry, not pause. Let's continue and go through this really quick. We didn't use a ton of exciting, metrics like chaos. We just looked at how many times they were starred or forked and said that was good enough for our kind of rough analysis. The next thing that we try to do in our other research question 4 was figure out how many projects actually have a community. It's one thing to do kind of scientific work if you are, your own little grad student and you don't share your work. And I think that's definitely scientific software and it may be open source, but that doesn't mean there's a community involved. And what was particularly interesting to me was how many were active or on life support. And to do that, we just, our metric was when was the last time anyone pushed to this repository in any way, shape, or form. And we found that most, well, certainly many had, some sort of activity in the last 6 months. That's going to be that red line right there. Some also had activity in the previous, 2 years, right? And so about half, did that. But a good chunk, we said, if there's been no activity in any way, shape, or form in terms of pushes on this repository, that sort of kind of drew our line in the sand and said, this is dead. And I hope, we had to choose kind of arbitrary points. This was a bit of a stickler when it was in peer review, but I hope you can see from this graph, not this graph, this histogram, how these choices for kind of drawing these lines in the sand we felt were, maybe not ideal, but at least reasonable. And there's definitely, stuff you can know. So let's just wrap this up with a quick conclusion. Here are the key takeaways. We found a little under 200,000, repositories. We identified, some 35,000 as RSE projects. We think that, at least some, some 14,000 have some community outside the core development team. But of these which have community or at least at one point had a community, only about 4,000 had, some sort of activity in the last 6 months. and once again, we can extrapolate this linearly, to say maybe there's more around 7,000 active RSE projects going on. So I want to pause here. I think, yeah, future work, there's a ton. I
Future
don't,
work is you come back with a more in-depth presentation about what you want to do in the future and how this works, because this is fantastic.
yeah. Future work, there's there's a ton of stuff. The key things are, how do we get at these repositories? And, if, because right, well, there's comparative analysis that I've already, it's done. Let's ignore the shameless plug. But, one of the things that I'd be curious about for this group, because it seems like this group has an in with the folks at GitHub, is I would just love to get a list of every single GitHub repository out there, period, that's open source, and then run it through this same sort of machine learning analysis. Because right now, a big challenge is, how do we even find them, right? How do we find these open source um, scientific or research software engineering repositories? And you see that I've gone through and said, well, I've done scrape searching and all that. But if we had this centralized source of data that we could then run through a chat GPT like model, that's interesting. So I'm going to pause here. Boris, I see your hands up. What's on your mind?
Okay. I think I have the most dreaded response in any talk. It's not a questions, but a comment. But first, I would like to ask you a question about list of repositories. There is a project, you might know about this. If not, take a look at ecosystem.ms. I have put the link into the chat, which tries to understand what are the open source projects, and it links them to repositories. So you might get a list of repositories from this project. And second, when you talk about which repositories are RCE related, which are not, you probably need a good definition and what is RCE. And I would like to remind about this book. I put it in the chat, the great book by Latour and Vulgar about what is science. And basically their definition, very simplified, is that science is a social activity of creation of scientific texts. So a good idea is science is something which is written in papers, preprints, and so on. So the way the approach we took is to take corpus scientific texts, extract repositories from them, software from them, and repositories from them, and then you will be able to look which are RCE related. We have our data sets, there are probably other data sets. So basically, I would suggest first get a list of all research related repositories, and then when you scrap them and look at the universities, you already have something labeled. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's a oh, Max, do you have something to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I just had some.
Yeah, go for it, Max.
Okay. I just did want to say that last graph does look pretty good. It does follow a power law distribution that would be expected for these kind of a natural project. I had a question about your classification. You chose to, that last part where you chose to have it assign a probability from 0 to 1. Do you see any issues with that? Have you tried maybe asking it 1 to 10? In general, like numerical and regression answers in LLMs, I could see room for.
Yeah, let me, I want to, yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to quickly respond to Boris, and then I'll get to you. because I think Boris's comment really leads into this really important aspect, which is how are we getting this data and how are we having these definitions and who decides it? And, you know, when I've been thinking about, I think about the making of wine, right? In that you can get grapes from different areas of a field, and eventually there's going to be a grape, a particular plant, but you'll have different vintages, you'll have different years, and different grapes and different grapes varieties can be put together to be bottled up into different bottles of wine. And so as Moss thinks about these repositories, it's not just getting individual repositories, but it's also labeling them as we're going to group these together because for this particular group it matches this definition that people are interested in. And and so trying to figure out what is the best way to label that is definitely something on my mind, particularly if we are trying to also then do time series analyses. In terms of Max's question, absolutely. We experimented with this. Our goal is to basically, massage our prompt so that we could maximize agreement with our ground truth, which is what we said, me, a human, labeled these projects as. So we tried different prompts like just yes or no or binary or scales. And what we eventually ended up doing is we found that if we say, give us an answer between 0 and 1 as a percentage, and then we did some thresholding. It turned out that having a threshold of just 0.5 was not ideal for this classification. It ended up being, I think, like 0.7. But this was some kind of, this was tinkering, right? This was tinkering to say, can we massage our prompt and our process to get the most accurate results? Is that could be validated. And I think that's kind of like every machine learning project that I've ever worked on. There's pre-processing and post-processing steps that you take to get the most accurate results, and that just happens.
I'm going to have to stop us there simply at time. Jump on the Slack. I put it in the chat. We have the working group calls every Wednesday. Let's get and start hacking on some of this. And Sam, your metaphor with wine is, I was giggling because this is the second time I've heard it. It's wonderful. And one of the things I think at Moss's perspective that I think is up, we're at the discussion phase right now and the beginning to develop this part, is building that underlying database of everything. So we're not prescribing definitions for anything. So that someone else can come in and say, I have access to these 90 metrics. I'm going to group them based on my definition, which changes every day and based on my context, which I think is entirely doable and would be very exciting if we could actually build that. So that said, thank you, Peculiar and Sam. We'll have to have you both on for more in-depth conversations about both the projects. And I hope to see you both on one of the Wednesday calls.
Is the next Wednesday call 2 days from now, or is it a week from Wednesday?
2 days from now, 4 p.m. Eastern. I will send you the invite. Oh, if folks want invites to that, ping me on Slack. We don't post that publicly just because we want it to be focused with people who have gone through that simple barrier of, here's something I'm willing to do to participate in that. Because it is a working call, it's not a discussion call. So do ping me on that Slack I put in the chat, and I'll add you directly to that invite.
Do you know if Mark or Declan would be on that call in 2 days?
Mark might still be camping. Declan is busy getting a car to fly. So hopefully he'll be there, but we'll see what his work allows.
Yeah, I did want to propose some things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, start those conversations in the Slack if you want, but Wednesday is a great place to do that.
Okay.
All right, again, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.